The sea has always carried stories. Among them are the tales of pirates, men who lived not with freedom, but with hunger, exhaustion, and constant danger. Their world was not filled with treasure chests and adventure, but with damp hammocks, spoiled food, storms that never ended, and punishments that left scars deeper than the sea itself. In the quiet of night, below deck, rats moved through the dark, while sickness spread from man to man. Above deck, the horizon stretched without end, and every sail on it carried either hope or fear. The image of the pirate has been shaped by legend, but the reality was far harsher than most could endure for even a single day. Tonight, we will walk slowly through their world, with every detail left as it was. So settle into the silence, let the sea carry you, and join us. The endless hunger at sea, the faint patter of rain on wood, and the groan of a rope stretched too tightly are the sounds that accompanied many voyages. For pirates, hunger was as constant as the ocean. Food was never plentiful, and what little they carried was often spoiled before the journey was halfway through. The men aboard lived with empty stomachs, surviving on scraps that most today would refuse to touch. The standard ration for sailors, and for pirates who seized it, was hardtack. Hardtack was little more than baked flour and water, pressed into thick biscuits. These biscuits were baked twice, sometimes 3 times, until they were rock hard. They could be stored for years without spoiling, which made them useful at sea, but they were almost impossible to chew. Sailors dipped them in brine, ale, or even soup made from boiled bones, just to soften them enough to bite. Many broke teeth trying to eat them. The insects inside were ignored. Weevils, small beetles, burrowed through the biscuits, leaving trails of powder. The men joked that the extra protein was a blessing, though no one truly enjoyed it. Salted meat was the next staple. Beef or pork was soaked in brine, packed in barrels, and stored in the hold. When opened weeks later, the meat was stiff, gray, and coated in salt crystals. The flesh had the texture of leather. To cook it, pirates boiled the meat for hours, then scraped away the top layer of fat. The broth became a thin soup, consumed with hardtack. Fresh meat was rare. Occasionally, a goat or pig taken from a raided ship was slaughtered. It provided a brief moment of relief before the men returned to salted stores. Cheese was another ration, though it aged poorly. Barrels of cheese grew moldy and sharp in flavor. The mold was cut away, and the rest eaten without complaint. Dried peas, beans, and oatmeal were sometimes carried, though they often rotted in damp storage. Pirates lacked proper preservation methods. Unlike navies, which kept organized supplies, pirates lived off stolen goods. Whatever they captured became their meals. Fresh food was a luxury. Oranges, lemons, and limes were valued most. They prevented scurvy, though many pirates did not know the reason why. They only observed that citrus restored strength. Edward England, a pirate captain in the early 1700s, ordered his men to raid island gardens whenever possible, seizing fruit before setting sail again. Without it, scurvy spread quickly, gums bled, teeth fell loose, and wounds failed to heal. Water was the greatest challenge. Barrels filled in port quickly grew stagnant. Within weeks, green slime formed at the surface. Worms and mosquito larvae swam inside. Pirates strained the liquid through cloth, but the taste remained foul. Beer or wine, when captured, was preferred. Rum was used most often. It did not spoil, and it dulled hunger. The daily ration of rum became as important as food. Many pirates drank heavily, using rum to wash down hardtack or salted beef. Occasionally, fishing offered relief. Hooks, lines, and nets were carried aboard. When seas were calm, men cast their lines, hoping for tuna, cod, or even shark. The meat was cut, dried in the sun, or eaten fresh, but fish were not reliable. Storms, rough waves, and the time needed for sailing duties often prevented fishing. Starvation was never far away. When supplies ran low, desperation grew. Raids were planned not only for treasure, but also for food and water. Pirates targeted merchant ships carrying grain, wine, or livestock. In 1720, the pirate Bartholomew Roberts captured a Portuguese vessel filled with flour, cheese, and sugar. His men cheered more for the food than for any silver aboard. Survival mattered more than gold. Ship's biscuits from wrecks had been recovered by archaeologists. In 1985, divers exploring the wreck of the Whydah galley A pirate ship sunk off Cape Cod in 1717 found fragments of hardtack fused into stone-like lumps. Their presence confirmed how central these rations were, even for pirates. These biscuits, when tested, were still intact after centuries, though no longer edible. Cooking was simple. Fires were dangerous on wooden ships, so meals were often boiled in iron pots over small controlled flames. Salt pork stew, pea porridge, or oatmeal gruel were the most common dishes. Bread was almost unknown, as ovens were absent. Meals were eaten quickly, often with fingers or wooden spoons, while standing on deck. Plates were rare. Men shared bowls, or used pieces of wood as trenchers. Spoilage was constant. Barrels leaked, rodents gnawed through sacks, and insects bred inside stored food. Ships were humid and hot, especially near the equator. Food spoiled within weeks, leaving pirates with little to eat. Hunger weakened them, making storms and battle harder to endure. The Spanish chronicler Alexander Olivier Exquemelin, who sailed with buccaneers, wrote that the sea's bread is hunger itself, and its wine is rum. Hunger shaped the rhythm of pirate life. Every raid, every decision was tied to survival at sea. Few could endure the monotony of biscuits, salted meat, and foul water. To last even a day meant chewing through insects, drinking slime, and swallowing salt. For pirates, it was ordinary. For anyone else, it was unbearable. Storms without end, the sound of wind rising over the open sea, was both warning and constant companion. For pirates in the 17th and 18th centuries, storms were as feared as any enemy. Ships built from oak and pine, held together with tar, pitch, and rope, were fragile before the endless motion of the ocean. A single gale could undo weeks of sailing, scatter supplies, and sweep men into the dark water without trace. The size of pirate ships was modest. Most were small brigs or sloops, between 60 and 100 feet in length. These vessels carried perhaps 100 men, packed tightly into every corner. Their light build allowed them to chase prey and escape larger warships, but it also made them vulnerable to sudden squalls. Heavy rain, shifting winds, and tall waves could overturn such ships easily. Larger vessels, such as captured frigates, offered some stability, but even these groaned under violent seas. When a storm appeared on the horizon, the order was given to reef the sails. Canvas was hauled down, folded, and tied tightly to prevent tearing. Men climbed the rigging barefoot, hands raw from rope, bodies soaked as waves struck the deck. It was exhausting, dangerous work. In the dark, with only lantern light, one slip meant a fall into the sea. No rescue was possible. The current carried men away within moments. Sailors had a phrase, "lost overboard, gone forever." Water poured through the decks, flooding the bilge. Pumps were manned around the clock during storms. These pumps were hand-operated, requiring men to push long wooden handles up and down. They expelled seawater slowly, never enough to match the waves crashing aboard. Crews grew weary, arms trembling from constant effort. Some ships sank not from a single blow, but from gradual flooding over long hours of rain. Lightning terrified sailors. The tall masts acted as natural targets. A strike could splinter wood, set canvas ablaze, or kill men instantly. In 1703, a storm off the coast of England destroyed hundreds of ships, naval and private alike. Reports tell of vessels shattered by lightning, their crews burned or drowned. Pirates knew the same risk on every voyage. No charm or prayer changed the outcome. Noise filled every storm. The snap of sails tearing, the groan of timbers, the crash of waves against the hull, all blended into a deafening roar. Men shouted orders, though voices were often lost in the wind. Many worked in silence, understanding motions by habit. At night, the darkness was near total. Lanterns blew out quickly, leaving only the pale glow of lightning to show the sea. Cold followed storms. Wet clothing clung to skin, refusing to dry. Fires for cooking could not be lit, leaving men hungry. Damp hammocks offered no comfort. Sickness spread easily after days without warmth. Fevers began with shivering and ended with men unable to rise. Some pirates described storms not as battles but as punishments, endured without hope of relief. Cargo suffered as well. Barrels of powder became damp, rendering pistols and cannons useless until dried. Food spoiled faster. Salted meat swam in waterlogged casks. Hardtack turned to mush. Water barrels burst open, spilling their contents into the bilge. The loss of supplies meant starvation followed storms almost as often as shipwreck. Shipwrecks were common. Reefs, shoals, and sandbars hid beneath waves, unseen until the storm pushed vessels onto them. Wooden hulls cracked quickly against stone. Survivors clung to broken planks scattered across beaches. In 1717, the pirate ship White Galley struck a sandbar during a storm off Cape Cod. The vessel broke apart within minutes. Of the 146 men aboard, only 2 survived. Those trapped aboard during wrecks faced grim choices. Some leapt into the sea, hoping to swim ashore. Others stayed, praying the ship might hold. Few made it. Contemporary accounts describe beaches littered with bodies after storms. Local villagers often found barrels, weapons, and clothing scattered with the dead. Pirates sometimes sought shelter in coves or behind islands, but storms shifted quickly. A safe anchorage could become a trap when wind changed direction. Anchors dragged across sand, failing to hold. Ships drifted helplessly toward rocks. Men cut anchor lines, hoping the vessel might escape into open sea, though this meant losing precious equipment. The fear of storms lingered constantly. Clear skies gave no guarantee. Sudden squalls could appear within hours. Charts were limited, compasses often unreliable near coasts, and forecasts unknown. Superstitions grew from this uncertainty. Whistling on deck was said to summon wind. Killing an albatross was believed to bring gales, a notion recorded by sailors and later echoed in poetry. Pirates shared these beliefs, clinging to them as explanation for the unexplainable. Endurance meant endless wet clothing, endless pumping, and endless fear. The ocean rolled without pause, reminding men that their lives were held only by wood, rope, and chance. Each storm tested the limits of both ship and crew. Few could withstand such trials for long. The diseases that waited at sea, the sound of quiet waves against a wooden hull hides what lived inside. Pirate ships were more than floating vessels. They were closed worlds, crowded, unwashed, and filled with disease. Illness spread faster than any storm, carried not only by the sea itself, but by the men who sailed it. Scurvy was the most familiar of these afflictions. It came not in sudden strikes, but slowly, creeping into the gums and bones of those who lacked fresh fruit and vegetables. Men's gums swelled and turned black. Teeth loosened, falling out one by one. Old wounds reopened, refusing to heal. Muscles weakened until men could no longer climb rigging or stand watch. In 1601, during a voyage to the East Indies, more than 100 sailors died of scurvy under Captain James Lancaster. Pirates faced the same fate, lacking steady supplies. They raided ports and villages for citrus, not knowing why it worked, only that lemons and limes restored strength. Dysentery was constant. With no proper sanitation, waste mixed with water, food, and living quarters. Men relieved themselves over the side of the ship or in buckets, which were emptied into the sea. Flies swarmed in the heat, spreading filth from one place to another. Dysentery brought fevers, cramps, and bloody diarrhea. Weakness followed, leaving men too frail to work. Some died within days. Others lingered for weeks, their bodies thin and pale, unable to keep food inside them. Smallpox was feared above all. It traveled with crews, spreading in the close quarters of hammocks and narrow passageways. Once a man showed the rash red spots rising into blisters. Panic spread with him. The disease scarred survivors and killed many more. In 1707, a report from the Caribbean described a pirate ship arriving in port with half its crew dead from smallpox. The survivors, scarred and weak, begged for food. Local governors often denied entry, afraid of contagion. Ships were left adrift, carrying death with them. Malaria haunted pirates near tropical coasts. Mosquitoes swarmed in stagnant water, breeding in barrels, bilges, and swamps where pirates came ashore. The fever came in waves, first chills, then burning heat, then exhaustion. Sweating men lay in hammocks, shaking as though caught in cold winds. Even under the equatorial sun, quinine, drawn from the bark of the cinchona tree, offered relief, but it was scarce. Only those who raided Spanish stores sometimes found it, for the Spanish guarded the supply. Others endured without remedy. Venereal diseases followed pirates from port towns. Syphilis and gonorrhea spread quickly among crews after brief stays on land. The French surgeon Alexandre Exquemelin, who sailed with buccaneers, recorded men suffering from sores, blindness, and madness caused by untreated syphilis. There was no cure at the time. Mercury was applied as a treatment, rubbed into the skin, or inhaled as vapor. It poisoned as often as it helped. Injuries became illnesses. Splinters from broken wood festered. Cuts from knives or swords grew infected. Without antiseptics, wounds turned black with rot. Amputation was the only answer when infection spread. Surgeons, when present, sawed through limbs, while other men held the patient down. No anesthesia dulled the pain. Hot irons were pressed against wounds to stop bleeding. Many died from shock before the cutting ended. Lice and fleas infested every hammock and piece of clothing. Itching was constant, scratching open skin, which in turn became infected. Rats carried fleas that spread plague in some regions. Though less common at sea, outbreaks were recorded when ships stopped in infested ports. Typhus, carried by lice, also appeared. It brought fever, delirium, and death within a week. The stench of illness never left the ship. Sick men lay side by side with the healthy in cramped quarters. Their moans filled the dark as lanterns swung overhead. Buckets of vomit, waste, and bloody cloth were emptied overboard each morning. The smell clung to the wood. The surgeon's corner, if one existed, was marked by saws, bandages stiff with dried blood, and jars of leeches. Leeches were placed on wounds in the hope of balancing blood, but they rarely saved lives. Pirates turned to superstition when medicine failed. Some carried charms, believing they prevented fever. Others blamed curses, ill winds, or the anger of the sea. A dead shipmate was sometimes sewn into his hammock with stones and dropped into the sea, yet fear lingered that his sickness would follow. Songs and prayers were whispered at night, though most knew they were powerless. Illness weakened entire crews. A ship with 30 men ill could not sail properly. Sails remained slack, pumps unmanned, cannons silent. Some pirate ships were abandoned, left drifting when too few men could work. Spanish records from 1712 describe encountering an English pirate sloop floating aimlessly, its crew dead or dying from fever. The ship was burned to prevent spread. The sea itself seemed to breed sickness. Salt air cracked lips, sun exposure brought boils, cold winds caused rheumatism, damp hammocks carried mold. Men lived in discomfort, their bodies breaking down even without disease. Few could endure years in such conditions without scars, blindness, or missing limbs. For pirates, disease was not an exception, but a constant. It was the shadow that followed every voyage, as certain as hunger and storms. No cure awaited, only brief relief when fruit, fresh water, or rest could be stolen from land. Few ships sailed long without losing men to sickness. The ocean carried its own toll, silent and steady, claiming life after life in the stillness of night. Punishments without mercy. The creak of wood, the steady roll of waves, and the faint hiss of rope against mast. These sounds filled the background of pirate life, but beneath them lay rules enforced with harsh punishments. Pirate ships, though often thought of as lawless, carried codes of discipline. Without them, order dissolved into chaos. To keep control, punishments were swift, public, and often cruel. Pirate articles, or codes, were agreements signed by the crew. Bartholomew Roberts, in 1721, wrote one such set of rules. They included bans on theft from fellow pirates, limits on gambling, and punishments for disobedience in battle. Each man placed his mark upon the articles before receiving his share of plunder. These codes formed the framework of discipline. Without adherence, the fragile unity of a pirate ship would break apart. The lash was the most common punishment. Whipping was carried out with rope or cado, 9 tails, a whip with 9 knotted cords. Flesh tore easily under repeated strikes. Blood ran down the back and onto the deck. Sometimes sand or salt was rubbed into wounds to prevent infection, though it deepened the pain. The whipping was done in front of the crew, a warning to all. Silence often followed the cries of the punished man, broken only by the rhythm of the waves. Marooning was feared more than death at sea. A man guilty of betrayal, theft, or cowardice might be left on a deserted island. He was given a pistol with 1 shot, some water, and perhaps a little bread. The rest was left to fate. Some islands carried no fresh water. Others swarmed with insects. Few survived long. The English pirate Edward Lowe once marooned a man on an island in the Bay of Honduras. Records describe him standing on the beach, watching the ship sail away, until he disappeared from sight. Keel hauling, though more associated with naval ships, was known among pirates. A rope was tied around the offender, who was dragged beneath the hull from one side to the other. The barnacles growing on the wood cut deeply into skin. Few survived without grave wounds. Many drowned before reaching the opposite side. It was a punishment rarely used, for it weakened the crew, but its reputation alone spread fear. Death by pistol was simpler. A man judged guilty of mutiny or treason might be shot before the assembled crew. The captain or quartermaster often carried out the execution. The body was then cast into the sea, sewn in a hammock with ballast to drag it down. Sharks followed ships, drawn to such offerings, their fins cut through the water near the hull. A reminder of what awaited the dead. Lesser punishments included striking with the flat of a cutlass, confinement in irons, or reduction of rum rations. Loss of rum was taken seriously, for the daily measure was a comfort in misery. Deprivation was seen as both insult and hardship. Pirates valued equality, but discipline reminded them that even in stolen freedom, rules bound them tightly. The quartermaster held authority in punishments. Elected by the crew, he enforced the articles, distributed shares, and carried out justice. Captains led in battle, but quartermasters kept order in daily life. This balance prevented tyranny, yet punishments remained severe. Order at sea was fragile. Harsh examples kept men in line when temptation or fear threatened to break discipline. Punishment was also symbolic. It marked a boundary between acceptable lawlessness and unacceptable betrayal. Stealing from a captured merchant was tolerated. Stealing from a crewmate was not. Refusing to fight endangered all. And so the penalty was heavy. The historian Charles Johnson, writing in 1724, described how pirate crews would debate punishments openly. But once decided, the act was carried out without hesitation. There were moments of dark ceremony. Maroonings were done in silence, with the crew watching from the deck as the man rowed ashore. Whippings were preceded by reading the articles aloud, a reminder that the man had broken his own oath. Even executions carried ritual, with last words granted before the shot. Pirates lived without nations, but they built their own system of justice, shaped by necessity and fear. Superstition sometimes colored punishments. A man believed cursed might be marooned not only for his crime, but to remove ill luck from the ship. Dice games decided minor disputes, but serious crimes demanded public spectacle. Justice was not gentle. It was swift, final, and often fatal. Punishments also served to harden the crew. Witnessing pain reminded men of their own fragility, binding them through fear. In the close quarters of a ship, memory of lashes or the sight of a marooned comrade lingered long after the act. Few spoke of mercy. Pirates valued survival over comfort, and discipline ensured survival at sea. The sounds of punishment lingered after the act. The crack of rope, the thud of wood against skin, the splash of a body entering the sea. Then only the steady rhythm of waves returned, as though nothing had happened. Life aboard continued, silent and resigned, carrying punishment with it into the next day. Weapons carried in silence. The sea stretched endlessly, flat and gray beneath a pale horizon. On a pirate ship, beneath this quiet surface, weapons waited in every hand and corner. Combat was not constant, but its presence shaped the rhythm of life. The weapons themselves were crude, heavy, and unreliable. Yet they were all that stood between survival and defeat. The cutlass was most common. Short, curved, and broad, it was designed for close fighting on crowded decks. Its blade rarely exceeded 3 feet, making it easier to swing in tight spaces. Pirates valued it not only for battle, but for daily tasks, cutting rope, opening barrels, or prying open crates. The weight of the cutlass gave it strength, though it dulled quickly. Sharpening was a regular task, done with stones carried in small pouches. The cutlass was a symbol of piracy, yet for those who carried it, it was more tool than treasure. Pistols came next. Flintlock pistols were single-shot weapons, slow to reload, often unreliable in wet conditions. Powder grew damp in sea air. Sparks misfired. A pistol might fire once, then fail in the next attempt. For this reason, pirates carried several at once. Blackbeard, Edward Teach, was said to have worn 6 pistols across his chest and bandoliers. After firing one, he discarded it for another. Reloading in battle was almost impossible. Each pistol carried meant one more chance at survival. Muskets were longer and heavier, suited more for naval crews than pirates. Still, they appeared on some ships. A musket could strike from a distance, though accuracy was poor. Powder smoke filled the air after a volley, clouding vision, stinging eyes, and choking lungs. After the first shot, combat often turned quickly to swords, axes, and knives. Boarding axes were carried for climbing, as well as killing. With sharpened blades and long handles, they could cut ropes, smash doors, or strike opponents. Pirates used them to seize ships, hacking through rigging to disable sails. Once aboard, the same axes cut through flesh and bone with brutal efficiency. Knives were everywhere. Small daggers, dirks, and seamen's knives hung from belts or hid in boots. They served in meals, in repairs, and in fights. In darkness, a knife was silent where pistols were loud. Disputes among pirates themselves often ended with knife wounds, quick and quiet, unnoticed, until blood stained the deck. Cannons lined larger ships. They were iron, heavy, and mounted on wooden carriages. A single cannon required several men to load, aim, and fire. Powder, wadding, and iron shot were packed down the barrel with rammers. The recoil shook the entire deck. Cannon fire tore sails, smashed planks, and scattered splinters that cut through flesh. Yet pirates often lacked full supplies of powder or ball. Many used chain-shot 2 balls linked by chain to shred rigging, crippling enemy ships before boarding. Noise filled the air during combat. Pistols cracked, cannons thundered, cutlasses clashed against steel. Powder smoke drifted in thick clouds, mixing with the smell of blood and salt. Men shouted, though the roar often drowned words. Combat lasted minutes, not hours. Ships were taken quickly, or not at all. Pirates did not fight in lines, as navies did. Their combat was sudden, close, and chaotic. Grappling hooks were thrown, ropes tied between ships, and men swarmed over rails. Decks became crowded, with bodies clashing at arm's length. A pistol fired inches from a face. A cutlass swung in narrow arcs. Knives pierced through clothing, through ribs, and into lungs. Fear lingered beneath the weapons. Flintlocks misfired. Cutlasses slipped from hands slick with sweat. Cannons backfired, bursting and killing the crew who loaded them. Powder magazines, if struck by fire, exploded and destroyed ships entirely. The tools of survival were also the tools of disaster. Weapons were maintained with care, though conditions made it difficult. Salt rusted iron quickly. Moisture spoiled powder. Pirates dried their supplies in the sun when possible, turning pistols barrel down to let water drain. Knives were wiped after every use. Cutlasses were kept sharp on stones. Cannons were swabbed with wet sponges to clear sparks before reloading, lest the next charge ignite too soon. Despite their weapons, pirates often avoided full combat. The show of force mattered more than battle itself. A ship flying the black flag often caused surrender without a shot fired. Fear of the weapons, of the pistols strapped across a chest, or the rows of cannons aimed from a deck, worked more effectively than their use. Resistance meant blood and ruin. Surrender meant life spared, at least for the crew. Yet when weapons were used, they left scars. Deck planks darkened with blood. Sails hung torn from chain shot. Powder marks stained men's hands black. Combat ended quickly, but its traces lingered for days. The tools of piracy were never silent. Even when sheathed, unloaded, or at rest, they carried the weight of constant readiness, waiting for the next encounter on the open sea. Clothes that never dried. The sea air was damp. Salt clung to everything it touched: wood, rope, skin, and cloth. For pirates, clothing was never fine. It was functional, tattered, and often stolen from those they captured. The image of bright coats and feathered hats belongs more to stories than to life. What pirates wore was shaped by the hardships of the sea. Most pirates dressed in simple linen shirts. These were loose, long-sleeved, and easy to move in. The fabric grew stiff with salt, sweat, and grime. Washing was rare. Fresh water could not be spared for clothing, so shirts remained stained until they fell apart. Some men patched holes with scraps of cloth. Others wore rags that barely held together. Collars frayed, sleeves torn, seams pulled loose. Trousers were made from canvas or wool. They reached below the knee, tied or buttoned at the waist. Like shirts, they absorbed salt and rarely dried. Damp cloth rubbed against skin until sores formed. Some pirates cut their trousers shorter, allowing freedom of movement in climbing rigging. Others wore whatever they could steal: naval breeches, merchant coats, or even women's skirts taken from captured cargo. Clothing was survival, not style. Feet were often bare. Shoes, when available, wore out quickly against wet planks and rough work. Leather rotted in sea air. Nails rusted. Some pirates tied cloth around their feet. Others went without, climbing rigging with calloused soles. Bare feet provided grip, but also left men vulnerable to splinters, cuts, and infection. The Surgeon's Journal of William Snelgrave, in 1719, noted how many sailors lost toes to untreated wounds caused by simple scrapes. Head coverings were common. Wide-brimmed hats, often stolen from officers, protected against sun and rain. Woolen caps kept heads warm in colder seas. Scarves and bandanas tied around the forehead absorbed sweat. These became practical signs of seafaring life. Bright colors were rare, but cloth faded by sun and salt sometimes appeared almost red or yellow, giving the impression of decoration where none was intended. Outer garments varied. Coats taken from captured officers were prized, though they quickly lost their polish. Fine wool and brass buttons dulled under constant exposure. Many pirates cut away tails of coats for easier movement. Leather jerkins, when found, gave protection from blows and weather. Capes, cloaks, and heavy coats were carried only in colder waters, then discarded when heat made them unbearable. Belts and sashes held weapons. Pistols, knives, and cutlasses were kept close to the body. Powder horns and shot bags hung at the waist. A sash of thick cloth wrapped around the middle provided extra support, sometimes layered several times. These sashes absorbed sweat and became stiff with salt, yet they served as both utility and comfort. Jewelry, when worn, carried mixed meaning. Gold earrings appeared among some pirates. They were said to pay for burial if a body washed ashore. Rings, brooches, or chains might be taken as plunder and worn until sold. But jewelry was not common. Most pirates sold valuables for food, drink, or weapons. The stories of heavily adorned pirates were rare exceptions, not the rule. Clothing decayed quickly. Wool grew heavy with damp. Linen tore under strain. Canvas stiffened. Sun bleached fabrics until they turned pale gray or brown. The smell of clothing lingered: mold, sweat, fish oil, and tar. Tar was used to seal rope, but it spread onto hands and into garments. The stain never left. Pirates smelled strongly of their work and their ship. Some clothing carried identity. Captains sometimes wore finer coats to command respect. Edward Teach, known as Blackbeard, tied slow-burning fuses into his beard and lit them during battle, surrounding himself with smoke. This was spectacle, not common dress. Most men beside him wore only rags. Their appearance reflected survival, not fearsome display. Cloth was patched again and again. A shirt might show a dozen repairs before it fell apart. Needles and thread were carried in small kits, passed among men. Repairs were crude but necessary. Without constant mending, clothing vanished into scraps. Nakedness was avoided not out of modesty, but for protection from sun, wind, and rope burns. On land, clothing changed little. Pirates arriving in port wore the same damp, torn garments they had lived in for weeks. Some traded plunder for better coats or shoes, but these quickly wore out again at sea. Travelers in the Caribbean wrote descriptions of pirates as ragged, sunburned, and foul-smelling. Their appearance carried no romance. It reflected the life they endured. The clothes never dried. Salt water soaked every fiber. Rain added to the damp. Sweat poured into fabric under Sunday. Even in sleep, hammocks were wet, pressing moisture into garments. The constant dampness shaped skin, leaving rashes, sores, and infections. Clothing clung heavily, never soft, never clean, never warm. To imagine a pirate is to imagine these garments: stained shirts, torn trousers, bare feet, rough sashes, and ragged coats. Each piece carried the mark of sea life, altered by sun, salt, and labor. Few could endure such discomfort long. For pirates, it was ordinary. For anyone else, it would be unbearable. Below deck in darkness, the space below deck was narrow, low, and always damp. Pirates lived here when they were not working, packed together among barrels, ropes, and the ship's timbers. Light was scarce. Small lanterns burned weakly, their smoke adding to the already heavy air. Darkness clung to every corner. The ceiling was low enough that most men could not stand upright. They stooped or crawled to move about. The wooden beams pressed down like weight forcing men to live hunched, their backs bent. The air felt close, stale, filled with the smell of tar, mold, and bodies. When the hatches were closed during storms, the space became unbearable, thick with breath and sweat. Hammocks swung side by side, strung from beams with little space between. 100 men might crowd into a ship designed for half that number. Hammocks touched one another, swaying together with the ship's motion. Some slept pressed shoulder to shoulder, hearing every breath of their companions. Privacy did not exist. The bilge lay at the lowest point. Here, water collected from leaks in the hull and rain washed through the decks. It mixed with spilled beer, rotting food, and waste. The bilge smelled foul, a choking odor that spread upward. Worms and insects bred in the stagnant pools. Rats nested nearby, feeding on scraps. Men slept only a few feet above this mire, their hammocks absorbing the damp air that rose constantly. Storage barrels crowded the space. Casks of salted meat, sacks of flour, and crates of powder were packed tightly. Space for men was carved out between supplies. Food rotted here, spreading sour smells through the dark. When rats gnawed through sacks, their droppings mixed with grain, unnoticed until meals were served. Noise carried differently below deck. The sea outside sounded muffled, replaced by the groan of timbers and the squeak of ropes. Every movement of the ship echoed. Water sloshed in the bilge. The scurry of rats scratched along the planks. In storms, the creaking grew louder, as though the ship itself groaned in pain. Heat became oppressive in tropical waters. With little ventilation, the air turned stifling. Men sweated heavily, their clothing soaked. Damp hammocks grew slimy with mold. Fleas and lice spread quickly. Skin diseases appeared, rashes spreading over arms and legs. Some men slept on the floor rather than in hammocks, lying on planks blackened with dirt and tar. Cold was equally harsh in northern seas. The dampness chilled to the bone. Blankets were scarce. Men huddled together for warmth. Hammocks felt wet and heavy. Breath hung in the air like mist, condensing on beams and dripping down. The constant change between heat and cold weakened bodies, inviting sickness. Smells never faded. Sweat, mildew, tar, gunpowder, and rot all mingled together. The smell of smoke from lanterns added to the heaviness. Even after days ashore, the odor of the ship clung to men's clothing and skin. Travelers wrote of pirates as foul-smelling long before they came near, their scent announcing them from afar. Below deck, space was also where wounds were treated. A surgeon, if one sailed with the crew, kept his instruments in a corner. Saws, knives, and bandages soaked with blood were laid out on tables made from planks. Men groaned in hammocks while fevers burned through them. The cries of amputations echoed in the enclosed space, carried through the beams. The darkness also shaped minds. Days blended together with little sunlight reaching below. Men lost track of time. Lanterns gave dim light, flickering and fading. Some stared into shadows, imagining movements that were not there. Sleep came and went without distinction between night and day. Fights broke out easily in such spaces. Arguments over hammocks, over food, or over stolen rum led to knife wounds in the dark. With no space to retreat, men lived pressed against both friends and rivals. The tight quarters turned every dispute into danger. Punishments often began below deck, carried above for all to see. Even rest here was uneasy. The constant rocking of the ship meant hammocks swung in rhythm. At times the motion comforted, lulling men into shallow sleep. At other times, it threw them against beams or spilled them onto the planks. Rats crawled over hammocks at night, searching for crumbs. Lice bit without pause. Men woke scratching, restless, never refreshed. The space below deck was not a home. It was a hollow, damp cavity where men endured rather than lived. The sound of the sea outside, the spray of rain, and the light of stars felt distant. What pirates experienced below deck was darkness, crowding, and decay. Few could withstand its weight without breaking. Finding the way across an empty sea, the sea stretched without edges. To a pirate ship, it appeared endless, blue in daylight, black at night, and unbroken except by clouds or distant sails. Finding a path across this emptiness was never certain. Navigation was a skill built on simple tools, memory, and constant observation. Even with these, error was frequent. The compass was most trusted. A magnetized needle floated or balanced upon a point, always turning north. Pirates used compasses stolen from naval or merchant ships. They were delicate, easily broken, and affected by the iron of cannons. Still, they gave a sense of direction when no land was in sight. Without one, a ship could drift aimlessly, carried by wind and current, far from any port. The log line was another tool. It was a rope knotted at regular intervals, tied to a piece of wood shaped like a triangle. The wood was thrown into the sea, and as the ship moved, the rope unspooled. Sailors counted the knots that passed through their hands in a set time, measured by a sand glass. This gave an estimate of speed, measured in knots. The method was simple, but rough seas, inattentive hands, or faulty glasses led to mistakes. The lead line measured depth. A rope marked with distances carried a lead weight at its end. Sailors dropped it overboard, listening for the sound of it striking seabed. Tallow pressed into the bottom of the weight brought up sand, shells, or mud, showing what lay below. Depths gave clues to location near coasts or shoals. In deep seas, the line told nothing, for it reached no bottom. Charts existed, though few were precise. Many pirates carried rough maps copied from merchants or stolen from navies. Coastlines were sketched with errors, islands misplaced, distances misjudged. Some seas were mapped in detail, such as the English Channel, while the Caribbean still held many inaccuracies. Sailors often relied on memory more than parchment, remembering landmarks, currents, and the color of water near certain coasts. The stars guided at night. The North Star, steady in the sky, gave orientation in the northern hemisphere. Constellations served as points of reference, but clouds often hid them. In storms, stars disappeared for days, leaving ships to drift uncertainly. The sun also served, its position at noon offering clues, though the instruments needed like the cross-staff or astrolabe were not always carried by pirates. Few were trained to use them well. Currents and winds shaped every voyage. The trade winds carried ships steadily west across the Atlantic, while currents swept them north or south. Experienced sailors felt these patterns in the roll of waves or the direction of spray, yet misjudgments occurred often. A ship bound for one island might find itself days later at another, carried far off course. Landfall was recognized by smell as much as sight. The odor of soil, flowers, or birds often reached sailors before the coastline appeared. Birds themselves gave clues. Flocks flying in a certain direction suggested land nearby. Clouds gathering on the horizon marked mountains unseen in mist. Pirates watched the sea closely for these signs, their survival depending on them. Errors in navigation brought disaster. Ships struck unseen reefs, grounding or breaking apart. Others missed islands entirely, running out of food and water while searching. In 1719, William Dampier recorded that his crew sailed for weeks without sighting land, their charts misleading them, their rations dwindling. Such stories were common. Navigation was never exact, only approximate. Superstitions filled the gaps where knowledge ended. Some believed certain birds guided them. Others thought whales marked safe passages. Whistling was said to call winds. Silence was demanded during sightings of land, as noise might frighten it away. These beliefs blended with the use of tools, giving shape to the uncertainties of the sea. Pirates relied on captured pilots. When taking a merchant vessel, they often forced its navigator to guide them. Local pilots knew reefs, shoals, and harbors. Their knowledge proved more reliable than compasses or charts. Some were bribed, others were threatened. Few refused, knowing the penalty for resistance. Even with tools, mistakes were constant. Compasses wavered, sand glasses ran uneven, charts lied. The ocean remained vast and unmapped. For every successful voyage, another ended in ruin. Navigation was less science than endurance, less certainty than guesswork. To live as a pirate meant accepting this uncertainty. The horizon stretched in all directions, featureless and vast. A compass needle, a rope with knots, and a memory of stars were all that stood between survival and loss. Few could bear such uncertainty long. For pirates, it was ordinary, as endless as the sea itself. Harbors that hid them. When pirates left the open sea, they sought harbors. These places were not grand cities but hidden bays, quiet coves, and small islands scattered across the Caribbean and the Atlantic. Some ports were known, like Nassau in the Bahamas. Others were secret, marked only in memory, where ships could anchor unseen. For men who lived in constant motion, these harbors were brief pauses, never permanent homes. Nassau was the most famous. By 1715, it had become a gathering place for hundreds of pirates. Its harbor offered calm waters, and its position near shipping lanes made it convenient. Wooden houses leaned against one another, taverns filled the shore, and stolen goods were traded openly. Merchants from Europe and America arrived in secret, exchanging food, clothing, and weapons for plunder. The British government tried to reclaim it. But for years, Nassau served as a republic of thieves, its orders shaped by pirate codes more than by law. Other harbors were smaller. Port Royal in Jamaica had once served as a haven until an earthquake in 1692 sank much of it into the sea. Afterward, pirates drifted to other islands. Tortuga, off the coast of Haiti, became a stronghold for French buccaneers in the 17th century. Its rocky cliffs and sheltered bays made it defensible. Taverns lined its shore as well, filled with rum and smoke. Sailors described it as noisy, crowded, and dangerous, though to pirates it was safety. Hidden coves dotted the coasts of Cuba, Hispaniola, and the Bahamas. These were not towns but quiet inlets. Ships anchored close to shore, repairing sails, drying powder, and dividing loot. Fires burned at night, their smoke rising above palm trees. Hammocks were strung between branches. Goats and pigs, left behind by earlier sailors, provided meat. Fresh water was gathered from streams. These coves served as temporary homes before the sea called them back. Pirates also used uninhabited islands. Woodes Rogers, a former privateer, later governor of the Bahamas, wrote in 1718 about small islands filled with hidden camps. Pirates buried stores of powder and food, marking them with carvings on trees or piles of stones. Some returned months later to reclaim them. Others never did, leaving caches to rot in the Sunday. Life in these harbors revolved around trade. Stolen goods, sugar, tobacco, cotton, and even slaves were exchanged for supplies. Local merchants profited, ignoring laws as long as payment was good. Rum flowed heavily. Pirates spent coin quickly, knowing tomorrow might bring death. Taverns grew crowded with men shouting, gambling, and drinking until they collapsed. The calm of the sea was replaced with the noise of land. Disease followed them ashore. Crowded taverns spread fevers as easily as ships did. Mosquitoes bred in stagnant pools. Smallpox and yellow fever struck ports as often as they struck ships. Harbors became places of both rest and sickness. Disputes grew as well. Loot was divided, but quarrels arose over shares. Fights spilled into the streets of Nassau and Tortuga. Knives flashed, pistols fired. Graves filled quickly in sandy soil behind the towns. Even ashore, the violence of pirate life never ceased. Yet the harbors carried a sense of temporary freedom. Men walked on solid ground after weeks of shifting decks. They felt the shade of trees, the warmth of sun without salt spray, the softness of soil under bare feet. Food was fresh, meat roasted rather than salted, fruit plucked from branches rather than stolen from cargo. These simple comforts marked the difference between survival and collapse. Governments sought to destroy these havens. The Spanish hunted pirates along their coasts. The British sent governors and soldiers to Nassau. In 1718, Woodes Rogers brought the king's pardon, offering forgiveness to pirates who surrendered. Many accepted, others refused and were hanged. Slowly, the famous ports declined, replaced by smaller, hidden coves. Still, for decades, these harbors endured. They were not built with stone or brick. They were built with memory, with paths marked by stars and currents, with names whispered from one crew to another. A bay on the north of Hispaniola, a cove in the Bahamas where mangroves hid masts, an inlet in Cuba where fresh water ran clear. These places served as homes, though only for days or weeks. The sea remained the true dwelling. Harbors were pauses, places to mend sails, to drink, to trade, to bury the dead, and to prepare for the next voyage. When sails rose again and anchors lifted, the land faded into the horizon, and the ship returned to its endless path. The harbors remained behind, quiet and waiting, until the next crew arrived to fill them with smoke, noise, and restless life. The truth of treasure. Stories of pirates often begin with treasure. Chests filled with gold, buried beneath sand, marked by maps and secret signs. But the truth at sea was different. Treasure existed, yet it was rarely golden. For pirates, plunder meant survival, not wealth. The most common prize was not coins but cargo. Merchant ships carried sugar, tobacco, cotton, indigo, and wine. These were valuable in markets across Europe. Pirates seized them, sold them through secret traders, and spent the proceeds on food, clothing, and rum. The goods themselves were bulky, packed in barrels and sacks, far from the glitter of gold. When silver or gold was taken, it was usually from Spanish ships. The Spanish Main carried treasure from the New World to Europe. Silver from Potosí in Peru, mined by forced labor, traveled north to Panama, crossed the isthmus by mule, and was loaded onto ships bound for Havana and Spain. These ships were targets, but they were heavily guarded. Occasionally, a pirate fleet captured one, and the reward was immense. Henry Morgan's raid on Portobelo in 1668 brought him and his men vast silver, though much was taken as coin rather than hidden treasure. Division of plunder followed rules. Pirate codes outlined shares. The captain received 2, sometimes 3, shares. The quartermaster received 1.5. Ordinary sailors received 1. Injuries earned compensation. A lost arm meant 600 pieces of 8. A lost eye, 100. These amounts were written into articles and honored when loot was divided. Equality, more than wealth, defined the division. Coins were spent quickly. Pirates lived for the present, aware that death might come tomorrow. They bought food, drink, clothing, and weapons. In Nassau, taverns grew rich on pirate silver. Merchants sold supplies at high prices. Knowing pirates paid without bargaining, within weeks, fortunes vanished. Few pirates grew wealthy. Many died poor. Buried treasure was rare. The most famous tale is that of William Kidd, who allegedly buried gold on Gardiner's Island in 1699 before his arrest. Some of it was recovered, but most stories of buried chests are inventions. Pirates had little reason to bury their loot. They spent it, traded it, or lost it to storms and battles. The image of maps marked with X came later, shaped by novels rather than history. Artifacts recovered from wrecks show the reality. When the Whydah Galley, a pirate ship sunk in 1717 off Cape Cod, was excavated, treasures were found: silver coins, gold dust, jewelry. But alongside them were more ordinary goods: pewter plates, lead shot, iron tools, and ship fittings. The treasure was mixed with the ordinary, reflecting life as it was lived. Plunder also meant people. Ships carrying enslaved Africans were raided. Pirates sometimes sold the captives, sometimes forced them into service, and sometimes freed them, offering places among the crew. Accounts describe Africans serving as gunners, carpenters, and fighters. For pirates, people were both part of loot and part of life. Weapons themselves were plunder. Cannons, muskets, pistols, and powder were taken from captured ships. Clothing was stolen from officers. Food was seized eagerly, more valued than gold when rations ran low. Even medical supplies, salves, bandages, and surgical instruments were considered prizes. What was taken reflected need more than greed. Rum was among the most desired captures. Barrels of it were celebrated, carried aboard with care. Rum dulled hunger, quieted fear, and filled long nights. A captured ship with rum might be valued more than one with silver. Accounts from Jamaica in the 1720s note pirates purchasing food from merchants with stolen rum as often as with coin. Documents also served as treasure. Letters of marque, issued by governments to privateers, were captured and used as cover. Charts and maps offered routes unknown. A stolen chart could mean survival, leading to hidden harbors or away from reefs. Paper, though fragile, carried great worth. The idea of great treasure hoards belonged less to pirates and more to their pursuers. Governments imagined pirates storing wealth in remote islands, a justification for campaigns against them. Writers expanded these tales, shaping legends of buried chests and endless riches. In truth, plunder passed quickly through pirate hands. The ocean gave, and taverns consumed. Treasure was not gold that lasted. It was food that filled empty stomachs. It was rum that softened hard nights. It was powder that kept pistols dry, or sails that carried ships faster. What pirates sought was survival, and what they called treasure was simply whatever allowed them to endure the sea one more day. Captains and the weight of command. A pirate ship was not ruled by chance. It carried order, shaped by its crew, and at the center of that order stood the captain. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of navies, pirate captains were chosen by vote. Leadership was granted by the will of the men, and it could be taken away in the same way. Command was heavy, but it rested on fragile trust. Captains were elected for skill. Men who showed courage in battle, or experience at sea, gained respect. Edward Teach, known as Blackbeard, earned his place through boldness and a fearsome presence. Bartholomew Roberts was chosen after the death of his predecessor, recognized for his ability to command. Charles Vane lost his captaincy when his crew judged him too cautious. Votes determined fate more than blood or rank. Once chosen, a captain held power in combat. In battle, his voice carried final authority. He directed the ship, ordered the guns, and led boarding parties. Hesitation meant disaster. His decisions could bring plunder or ruin. But outside combat, his power was limited. The quartermaster balanced his authority, ensuring no captain ruled like a tyrant. The quartermaster enforced the code. He settled disputes, distributed food, and carried out punishments. He represented the crew against the captain, a counterweight to authority. If men felt cheated or mistreated, the quartermaster brought their voices forward. In some cases, the quartermaster commanded more loyalty than the captain himself. Captains lived under constant scrutiny. A mistake in navigation, a failure in attack, or a poor division of loot could cost him his command. Crews gathered openly to decide his fate. If they lost faith, they voted him out. Some were left aboard as common sailors. Others were marooned or killed. Leadership offered no safety. It was both an honor and a burden. Appearance shaped reputation. Blackbeard tied burning fuses into his beard, surrounding himself with smoke. Roberts wore fine clothes, a crimson waistcoat, and carried himself with elegance. Such displays projected authority, inspiring fear in enemies and respect among crews. Yet most captains wore the same ragged garments as their men, their difference marked only by bearing and command. Captains also bore risk in combat. They led the first boarding parties, pistols and cutlass in hand. They exposed themselves to musket fire, to sword blows, and to capture. If taken alive, captains were executed swiftly by governments. While some sailors might be spared or enslaved, captains faced the gallows. Their names appeared in records. Their deaths used as warnings to others. Words mattered. Captains addressed their men before raids, steadying nerves and promising rewards. Bartholomew Roberts was recorded as speaking calmly to his crew before engagements, reminding them of their articles and their equal shares. His tone was measured, neither grand nor fiery. Such words shaped loyalty, though loyalty never lasted without proof. Discipline rested on fairness. A captain who claimed more than his share, or who punished without cause, was resented. Crews watched closely for signs of greed. They valued equality, and a captain who broke that value soon lost trust. Authority came from consent, not force. Even Blackbeard, remembered as fearsome, relied on image more than cruelty to maintain power. Captains were also negotiators. They spoke with merchants, governors, and even naval officers. Some accepted pardons on behalf of their crews. Others traded plunder through secret agreements. Leadership meant managing not only men, but also the uncertain politics of the sea. Examples survive in records. Roberts commanded over 400 men at his height, yet his death came from a single cannon shot in 1,722. Blackbeard was killed in 1,718 after a desperate fight against Lieutenant Maynard. Charles Vane, once voted out by his men, drifted until he was captured and hanged. Their lives show how command never guaranteed safety, only responsibility. The captain's cabin, when one existed, was modest. A small space with a table, charts, and a hammock. Light entered through stern windows, filtered and dim. Here, the captain planned courses, met with the quartermaster, or read stolen letters. Yet, even this cabin was temporary. Votes could remove him at any time. Authority was fragile, like rope frayed by salt. Pirate leadership was both structured and unstable. It was shaped by equality and bound by necessity. Captains carried weight in battle, but walked the same decks as their men. They bore both honor and risk, never certain if tomorrow would bring victory, betrayal, or death. Days without change. Life aboard a pirate ship followed a rhythm shaped by the sea. There was no clock but the sand glass, no calendar but the rising and setting of the Sunday. Each day blended with the next. Routine carried the men forward, steady and unbroken. As the ship moved endlessly across water, the day began early. At 4 a.m, the watch changed. Lanterns flickered as men stirred from hammocks. their bodies stiff from damp cloth and restless sleep. Those called to duty climbed on deck, adjusting sails, checking lines, and scanning the horizon. The air was cool before dawn, the sea dark except for faint light on the waves. At sunrise, the crew gathered for the first meal. It was not a feast. Hardtack and salted meat were served, sometimes softened with broth or rum. Men chewed slowly, breaking the hard biscuits with knives or soaking them in ale. There was little conversation, only the sound of eating, the groan of wood, and the call of seabirds circling overhead. Afterward, tasks began. The deck was scrubbed with sand and water, sailors on their knees pushing brushes back and forth. Sails were mended with needle and thread, holes patched with scraps of canvas. Ropes were tarred to keep them from rotting. Powder and weapons were inspected, pistols wiped, and cutlasses sharpened on stones. These tasks repeated each day, for the sea wore down everything it touched. The ship's carpenter checked the hull. He searched for leaks, hammering wedges into cracks, coating seams with pitch. The gunner tended cannons, swabbing them to clear soot, measuring powder, and storing shot. The cook boiled meat in iron pots, stirred pea porridge, or prepared oatmeal when supplies allowed. Smoke rose faintly from the small galley fire, though flames were always kept low to prevent disaster. Music sometimes filled the air. Pirates carried fiddles, pipes, or drums, playing while men worked. The rhythm of songs matched the pull of ropes or the turning of capstans. Simple chants carried across the deck, soft and steady, blending with the creak of timbers. Music passed time, breaking monotony without excitement. Midday brought another meal. The food rarely changed. Salted pork, beans, or porridge was served. Men drank water mixed with rum, the grog masking the taste of stagnant barrels. After eating, some rested in hammocks. Others sat on deck, mending clothes or carving small objects from wood. Dice and cards appeared. Games played with coins or scraps of cloth. Arguments rose quickly, for boredom sharpened tempers. The afternoon watch continued tasks. Lookouts stood at the masthead, their eyes straining across the horizon. The sight of a sail meant work and possible plunder. Most days, nothing appeared but waves and sky. Time passed slowly, marked only by the turning of the sandglass. Each half hour, the glass was flipped, and a bell rang. Its sound echoed through the ship, a reminder of time's steady passage. Evening came with the setting Sunday. The light softened, the air cooled, and the sea darkened. Lanterns were lit again, their glow dim and smoky. The crew gathered for the last meal of the day. The food was the same hardtack, meat. Sometimes fish caught with lines trailing in the water. Rum was poured once more, and voices grew louder in the fading light. Songs were sung, stories told, and dice thrown across planks. The noise lasted until watches were called. The night was divided into shifts. Some men remained awake, keeping the ship steady, while others returned below deck to hammocks. Sleep came in fragments, broken by calls, footsteps, and the sound of waves. Rats moved across beams. Lanterns burned low. Dreams were shallow, filled with images of sea and sky. Discipline held the routine together. Articles were read when needed, punishments carried out if rules were broken. Men knew their place, their duties, and their share. The quartermaster checked supplies, recording what was eaten, what remained, and what must be taken on the next raid. The captain planned courses, speaking quietly with the helmsman as stars filled the sky. Each day repeated the last. The same meals, the same tasks, the same noise of ropes and sails. Weeks passed in this sameness, broken only by storms or encounters with other ships. For pirates, this monotony was life. The sea did not change, and so their days did not change. Routine was survival, steady and dull, as endless as the water beneath them. Battles at sea. Most days at sea were quiet, filled with the rhythm of waves and wind. But when another sail appeared on the horizon, the silence shifted. Pirate battles were not grand or prolonged. They were brief, close, and brutal, carried out with smoke, noise, and steel. The first step was pursuit. A pirate ship adjusted its sails, catching the wind to close the distance. The chase could last hours, sometimes days. Lookouts watched the horizon, their eyes fixed on the fleeing ship. The crew grew restless, waiting for the moment when cannons might fire. The sound of ropes tightening, the snap of sails, and the groan of timbers filled the long approach. Flags were raised as warning. Pirates sometimes flew false colors, disguising themselves as merchants or naval ships. At the last moment, the black flag was hoisted, its skull or symbols fluttering in the wind. This was meant to frighten more than to fight. Many ships surrendered at the sight, knowing resistance meant death. When they refused, the battle began. Cannons fired first. The thunder rolled across the sea, followed by thick clouds of smoke. The smell of powder burned in the nose and throat. Iron balls struck wood, tearing planks, splintering beams, and throwing shards across the deck. Chain shot was fired at masts and rigging, whirling through the air to slice ropes and sails. Grape shot scattered small iron balls that tore through men as easily as canvas. Pirates aimed not to sink, but to disable. A ship broken in its sails or rudder could not escape. Once crippled, the real battle began. Grappling hooks were thrown, ropes tied from one vessel to the other. Pirates swarmed across, shouting, their weapons drawn. The noise of boarding was deafening steel against steel, pistols cracking, men grunting and crying out. The decks grew crowded, bodies pressed close, blows falling in every direction. The cutlass was most common here. Its curved blade swung in short arcs, cutting through cloth and flesh. Pistols fired at arm's length, then were discarded. Knives flashed quickly, stabbing in gaps between blows. Boarding axes smashed into doors and skulls alike. The fight lasted minutes, sometimes less. Smoke, sweat, and blood mingled, the air thick with violence. Captains led the charge. Blackbeard entered battles with fuses burning in his beard, surrounded by smoke, his pistols strapped across his chest. Roberts stood in bright coats, commanding with gestures and calm words. Their presence inspired men, though death often came swiftly even to leaders. In 1722, Roberts fell to a single cannon shot. His command ended in an instant. When resistance ended, surrender followed. Crews dropped their weapons, hands raised. The noise faded, replaced by silence and heavy breathing. Dead and wounded lay scattered across the deck. The victors searched the ship, seizing cargo, weapons, and supplies. Prisoners were bound, some pressed into service, others set adrift or executed. Loot was carried back across the ropes, barrel by barrel, chest by chest. The aftermath was grim. Decks were slick with blood, sails torn, and masts splintered. Surgeons worked quickly, sawing limbs, binding wounds, and cauterizing flesh. The cries of the wounded filled the air long after the battle ended. Corpses were sewn into hammocks with ballast and dropped into the sea. Sharks followed, their fins cutting through the waves near the ships. Battles rarely lasted long. The imbalance of surprise, speed, and fear meant that many ended before they began. Some merchant ships surrendered at the first sight of the black flag. Others fought briefly before being overwhelmed. Only naval ships offered true resistance, and when pirates faced them, the outcome was often reversed. Many pirate crews were captured this way, their leaders hanged in port as examples. The memory of battle lingered. The smell of powder clung to clothes and skin. The marks of shot scarred planks and beams. Men carried wounds that never healed, scars across faces, missing fingers, limps that lasted for life. For those who survived, the fight was both ordinary and terrible. It was a part of life at sea, repeated whenever sails appeared unwilling to yield. Battles were not constant, yet they shaped the image of piracy more than any other part of the life. The flash of pistols, the roar of cannons, the rush of men across ropes. All of it was brief, sudden, and consuming. For the pirates themselves, it was another task in their routine, necessary for food, for supplies, and for survival. For those who resisted them, it was terror. The sound of the waves continues, steady and unbroken, just as it did for those who lived their short lives at sea. The pirates of history are often remembered through stories of gold, flags, and freedom, but their days were filled with hunger, storms, sickness, and silence. Few lasted long, and few are still left behind anything beyond a name recorded in passing. What remains are fragments, rusted weapons, broken planks, and the faint memory of men who endured the ocean one day at a time. As you drift now into rest, let the slow rhythm of the sea carry you with them, across waters that seem endless and quiet. If you would like to hear more of these histories told softly, in detail and without hurry, then stay with us. Subscribe and join us again as we continue through the forgotten corners of the past.